Ave Imperator. I need you to imagine something. You are sealed inside a metal coffin. You cannot move your arms. They were amputated. You cannot feel your legs. They no longer exist. You cannot see through your own eyes. Cannot hear through your own ears. Cannot speak with your own voice. Every sensation is filtered through broken machinery that translates the world into static and pain. You have been in this coffin for 700 years. You will remain for 700 more. And everyone calls this an honor. This is life inside a dreadnought. And it is a fate worse than any hell. Ave Imperator. I am Lex Mechanic Terminus Vero Thane, assigned to the Departamento Munitorum's classified division of Astartes psychological documentation. For 91 years, I have interviewed dreadnought pilots across 17 different Space Marine chapters. I have recorded their testimonies, cataloged their suffering, and preserved their stories in archives that will never be opened. My purpose is not to help them. My purpose is to ensure their experiences are documented so that future generations might understand what we do to these warriors. Whether that understanding will ever lead to change, I do not know, but the record must exist. The chamber where I conduct these interviews is deep within Terra's bowels, in a section of the Imperial Palace that does not officially exist. Dreadnoughts are brought here under maximum security, told they are receiving routine psychological evaluation required by the Adeptus Terra. What actually happens is that I give them 1 hour, 60 minutes, to speak freely about their existence. No chapter oversight, no chaplains listening, no tech priests monitoring, just them, their truth, and my recording devices. In 91 years, I have conducted 473 interviews. Not one, not a single dreadnought pilot, has described their existence as anything other than torment. Let me share with you the testimony of the first interview I ever conducted, because it set the template for every interview that followed. His name was Brother Ancient Kalen of the Dark Angels. He had been entombed for 743 years. This is what he told me. Hour 1. The amputation of self. You want to know what it's like? Truly? Not the propaganda they feed to scouts, but the actual experience of being entombed? Kalen's voice through the Vox speakers was distorted, mechanical, but I could still hear the exhaustion beneath the static. It starts with the surgery. They tell you that you will feel nothing, that the pain suppressants will keep you comfortable. This is the first lie. You feel everything. They cannot give you enough drugs to actually stop the pain. If they did, you would die. So instead, they give you just enough to keep you from going into shock, while remaining conscious enough to provide feedback as they map your neural pathways. I felt them remove my legs. Not just the cutting, I felt the separation. The moment when my brain realized that parts of me were simply gone. Your mind doesn't accept this immediately. For weeks afterward, I would try to move legs I no longer possessed, feel phantom sensations in feet that had been incinerated as medical waste. Then my arms, both of them, severed at the shoulder because the wounds were too extensive to salvage. I remember watching them fall away, watching my hands that had held bolters for 2 centuries, hands that had gripped the throats of heretics, hands that had clasped my brother's shoulders in brotherhood. I watched them become disconnected meat. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when they removed my face. They don't tell you about this beforehand. They don't explain that to fit you into the sarcophagus, they need to remove everything that makes you recognizable as human. Your ears, your nose, your jaw, all unnecessary for survival. All impediments to the neural interface. I felt the scalpels cutting away my identity piece by piece. I felt my face being peeled away like you would peel fruit. And I couldn't scream because they had already removed my ability to vocalize independently. My voice now comes from speakers, not from lungs and vocal cords I no longer control. By the time they finished the surgery, approximately 17% of my original body mass remained. Brain, upper spine, a few critical organs they couldn't yet replicate, my gene seed, and the absolute minimum tissue necessary to keep those systems alive. Everything else was just gone, thrown away, disposed of, as if 200 years of that body's service meant nothing. He paused. I heard what might have been a sob, but the Vox speakers turned it into an electronic glitch. They sealed me into the sarcophagus while I was still fully conscious. I heard the locks engage. I felt the life support tubes connecting to my remaining organs. I experienced the neural interface activating. Thousands of connection points boring into my brain simultaneously. And then I tried to move. Nothing happened. Or rather, something happened. But it wasn't movement in any way I understood. The Dreadnought's arm twitched. But it felt wrong, distant, alien. Like I was watching someone else move my limb rather than actually controlling it myself. I tried to speak. The Vox speakers activated. But the voice that emerged was not mine. It was amplified, distorted, robbed of every subtle inflection that makes speech human. I sounded like a machine trying to impersonate a person. I tried to see. The visual feeds activated, showing me the world through camera lenses and electromagnetic sensors. But it wasn't sight, not real sight. It was data being translated into something my brain interpreted as vision. But everything was wrong. The colors were off. The depth perception was skewed. The field of view was too wide and too narrow simultaneously. That's when I started screaming. Not aloud. I couldn't scream aloud anymore. But mentally, psychically, with every fiber of consciousness I still possessed. I screamed. They sedated me, pumped my sarcophagus full of chemicals designed to force unconsciousness. And when I woke, 3 months had passed, and they told me I had adapted. I had not adapted. I had simply learned to stop screaming. The sensory nightmare. Lex Mechanic. Do you have any cybernetic augmentations? Enhanced organs? Anything that required your brain to learn to interpret new sensory input? I nodded. I have an augmetic eye. My left eye was damaged in an industrial accident 40 years ago. The replacement provides enhanced vision spectrum. Then you understand partially. You know what it's like when sensory input doesn't match what your brain expects. But imagine that times 1,000. Imagine every sense you possess being replaced with something almost, but not quite right. The Dreadnought has cameras for eyes. But they don't work like human eyes. They see in spectrums humans can't perceive. Ultraviolet, infrared, electromagnetic fields. My brain receives all this information simultaneously and has to somehow filter it into something comprehensible. Everything is too bright and too dark at the same time. I see heat signatures bleeding through solid walls. I see the electromagnetic fields generated by machinery. I see radiation patterns invisible to baseline human sight. And my brain, evolved to interpret simple reflected light, tries desperately to make sense of this chaos. The result is constant visual confusion. I look at a space marine and I see his heat signature, his power armor's energy field, the radiation his weapons emit, the subtle electrical impulses of his nervous system, all layered over the normal visual data. My brain struggles to determine which layer is real, which one I should focus on. After 700 years, I still cannot look at something and simply see it clearly. Every observation is an exercise in filtering, in trying to extract meaning from sensory chaos. Hearing is worse. The Dreadnought's audio receptors pick up frequencies far beyond human range. I hear the high-pitched whine of electronics everywhere I go. I hear the subsonic rumble of distant machinery. I hear Vox transmissions that aren't meant for me. Radio frequencies. Electromagnetic interference. And all of it is filtered through speakers that don't replicate natural sound. When someone speaks to me, there's a slight delay between their mouth moving and my brain processing their words. When I speak to them, I hear my own voice with that same delay, like a Vox transmission with bad lag. You cannot understand how maddening this is. Try having a conversation where every word arrives a half-second late, where you hear yourself speaking, but it doesn't sound like you, where background noise is so overwhelming that you struggle to focus on the voice in front of you. Now imagine that continuing for centuries. Touch is perhaps cruelest of all. The Dreadnought has pressure sensors, temperature gauges, all manner of equipment designed to let me feel my environment. But it's not touch. Not really. When I grasp something with my power fist, I get data, pressure readings, resistance measurements, temperature differential, all translated into neural impulses my brain interprets as sensation. But it's nothing like actually feeling an object. I cannot feel texture. I cannot feel weight the way I used to. I cannot feel the warmth of another being's presence. When a battle brother clasps my chassis in brotherhood, I know intellectually that it happened. My sensors register the contact. But I don't feel it. Not truly. And the absence of touch. Emperor, the absence of touch is like losing a limb you didn't know was critical until it was gone. Humans are tactile creatures. We need to feel things. We need physical contact with our environment to understand our place in it. I have not truly touched anything in 743 years, and I will never touch anything again. The prison of meat and metal. But the sensory deprivation is not the worst part. Lex Mechanic. The worst part is the confinement. You are sitting in a chair right now. Yes? If you wanted, you could stand up, stretch, walk around the room, scratch an itch, adjust your position when you get uncomfortable. I cannot do any of these things. I cannot move at all. Oh, the Dreadnought moves. I can walk in the chassis. I can turn. I can manipulate objects with my weapons. But inside the sarcophagus? I am completely immobilized, locked in place by restraints and life support tubes, unable to shift position even slightly. You know what happens when humans are completely immobilized for extended periods? We develop pressure sores. Our muscles atrophy. Our circulation fails. Our bodies literally break down from the inability to move. The same happens to me. Except the life support systems keep me alive through it. They manage the pressure sores with medical foam. They stimulate my atrophied muscles electrically to prevent total degradation. They circulate my blood artificially because my immobile body cannot do it efficiently, but they cannot prevent the psychological horror of absolute confinement. Imagine being tied down so completely that you cannot even shift your weight. Now imagine that continuing not for hours or days, but for decades, for centuries, for 743 years of absolute physical imprisonment broken only by brief periods when the Dreadnought deploys and I can at least move the chassis. I spend 98% of my existence completely immobile, locked in chemical stasis when not deployed, but even during stasis, some part of my consciousness persists. I dream of movement. I have phantom sensations of stretching limbs I no longer possess. I wake from stasis with my mind screaming to move, only to remember that movement is forever denied to me. Do you understand what this does to a mind? The human psyche is not designed for this level of confinement. Prisoners in isolation cells at least have space to pace. They can stand, sit, lie down. They have freedom of movement within their cell. I have no freedom at all. I am a consciousness trapped in a tiny volume of meat, which is itself trapped in a metal coffin, which is itself locked inside an armored chassis. Sometimes I fantasize about what I would do with just one day of freedom. One day where I could move as I used to. Walk, run, feel the wind on skin I no longer have. Touch something, anything, with hands that no longer exist. But this fantasy is itself torture, because I know it will never happen. I will never again experience freedom of movement. I will die in this coffin, still locked in place, still unable to perform the simple human act of scratching my own face. The voice that isn't yours. They told me I would get used to the Vox speakers, that after a few months, my synthesized voice would feel natural. 743 years later, I still cannot recognize my own voice when I speak. The Vox speakers amplify sound. They add reverb. They filter out frequencies and emphasize others. The result is a voice that sounds approximately like me. If I were shouting through a cathedral's Vox system while someone adjusted the audio settings randomly. But it's not just the distortion. It's the disconnect between intention and output. When you speak, you feel your vocal cords vibrate. You feel your tongue shape words. You feel your breath support your voice. There is a direct, physical connection between your intention to speak and the sound that emerges. I no longer have that connection. When I decide to speak, neural impulses travel from my brain to the Vox interface. The system interprets those impulses, sometimes correctly, sometimes not, and activates speakers that produce sound. There is a delay, a tiny one, measured in fractions of a second, but perceptible. I form a thought, issue the command to speak it, and then a moment later I hear the words emerge from speakers mounted on my chassis. It is like watching yourself dubbed in a foreign film. The words are yours, but they don't feel like yours. They arrive too late. They sound wrong. You cannot modulate them the way you want, cannot whisper, cannot shout effectively, cannot convey subtle emotional tones. I have tried to have quiet conversations with battle brothers. Impossible. My voice is always loud, always mechanical, always alien. I cannot whisper secrets or speak softly to dying comrades. I boom at them like a preacher from a pulpit, unable to match the intimacy of the moment. I have tried to express rage in battle. The Vox speakers make me sound angry. Yes, but in a generic, synthetic way. Not my rage. Not the specific fury I feel. Just angry machine noise. After 7 centuries, I no longer know what my real voice sounded like. I cannot remember the subtle tones I once used. All I know is this distorted, mechanical approximation, and yet I must continue using it. Because silence is worse. Silence is admitting that I am no longer capable of human communication. Silence is surrendering the last vestige of personhood I still possess. The first realization, this is forever. Do you know when it truly hit me? Lex Mechanic? When I truly understood what had happened. It was 6 months after my entombment. I had been deployed twice. Performed adequately in both engagements. The tech priest said my neural adaptation was progressing well. The chaplain said I was honoring the chapter through my service. I was in my alcove in the reclusium. In the brief period between stasis cycles when they wake us for systems maintenance. A young tech priest was performing routine checks on my life support systems. He couldn't have been more than 20 standard years old. Young enough to be my great-great-great-grandson if I had ever had descendants. He was humming while he worked, some tune I didn't recognize. Probably popular in the 30 years I had been in stasis before this awakening. And I realized, this boy was born while I was already entombed. He has lived his entire life in a universe where I have been a dreadnought. To him, I have never been anything else. Then I did the mathematics. I was entombed at age 217. I am now approximately 217 years and 6 months old. I have served in the dreadnought for 6 months. But I will likely serve for another 1,000 years. Maybe longer. If my chassis remains intact and my brain doesn't fail. That tech priest's entire lifetime, 20 years, represented a tiny fraction of my dreadnought service. His children will live and die while I serve. His grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. Entire dynasties of tech priests will maintain my chassis while I remain trapped inside it. Unchanging. Eternal. I will outlive generations. I will see the galaxy change in ways I cannot predict. I will serve until the heat death of my brain or the destruction of my chassis. And there is no parole, no retirement, no reward at the end except the eventual mechanical failure that finally releases me. This is forever. That realization broke something in me. Not all at once. I didn't go mad or malfunction. But something fundamental shifted. I stopped thinking of this as temporary difficulty to be endured. I started understanding it as my permanent existence. I am not a space marine operating a dreadnought. I am a mind imprisoned in a dreadnought. Forever denied the experience of being a space marine. This is not a vehicle I pilot. It is a cage I inhabit. And there is no key. The isolation that breaks minds. The second interview I conducted was with Brother Ancient Septimus of the Iron Hands. He had been entombed for 1,412 years. When I asked him about the hardest part of dreadnought existence, he gave me an answer I was not expecting. The loneliness. Emperor's teeth. The unbearable loneliness. He continued, Lex Mechanic, do you have friends? People you speak with regularly? Colleagues you share experiences with? I confirmed that I did. Then you are blessed beyond measure. Because I have watched everyone I ever knew die. Not once, dozens of times over. When I was first entombed, my squad brothers visited me in the reclusium. They would come after training, share news of the chapter, tell me about battles I missed while in stasis. They treated me like I was still one of them. Then they started dying, killed in combat. Mostly, Ceres fell on Cronus. Valen died defending our fortress monastery. Decimus succumbed to wounds that even our apothecary IES could not heal. Each death diminished me, but I still had others, Marines from different squads, officers I had served with, even younger brothers who remembered my service in flesh. Then the decades passed, then centuries, and one by one, every single person who knew me as a space marine died. Not just my generation, the generation after that, and the one after that. Now, when I wake from stasis, I am surrounded by strangers. Oh, they call me Brother Ancient. They show me respect, but they don't know me. They know the legend, the relic, the ancient warrior who has served since before their grandfathers were born. But Septimus, the Marine who joked with his brothers, who had favorite foods in the feast hall, who had a specific way of maintaining his bolter. That Marine died over 1,000 years ago, and nobody alive remembers him. I am a ghost haunting my own chapter. I walk among living brothers who see me as a piece of equipment rather than a person. They speak carefully around me, with formal respect rather than easy camaraderie. They do not invite me to their confidences because how can you confide in a walking tank? The other dreadnoughts in my chapter, the few who remain from my era, they understand. But we are kept in stasis on different schedules. We wake at different times for different deployments. In 1,412 years, I have had exactly 17 conversations with dreadnoughts who remember the same chapter once served. 17 conversations in 14 centuries. The rest of the time, I am alone, sealed in my sarcophagus, surrounded by strangers who respect me but do not know me, waiting for the stasis drugs to grant me temporary oblivion. This is the loneliness that breaks minds, not the dramatic isolation of a prisoner in a cell, but the slow, grinding loneliness of being the only person left who remembers your own life. The madness of eternal wakefulness. Brother Ancient Tiberius of the Ultramarines provided the most disturbing testimony I have ever recorded. He had been entombed for 2,876 years, but unlike most dreadnoughts, his stasis system had malfunctioned catastrophically 800 years into his service. He had been fully conscious for 2,076 years straight. Lex Mechanic, I need you to understand something about human consciousness. It is not designed to run continuously for millennia. We need sleep. We need dreams. We need periods of unconsciousness where the brain can process experiences, consolidate memories, repair itself. I have not truly slept in over 2,000 years. The stasis drugs are supposed to provide this function. They force unconsciousness, grant rest, allow the brain to reset. But my system failed, and by the time they discovered it, I had already been awake for decades. They tried to fix it. They replaced components, recalibrated systems, adjusted chemical balances. Nothing worked. My brain had adapted to the altered chemical environment in ways that made me resistant to sedation. So I have been awake, continuously, for 2 millennia. Do you know what happens to a human mind under those conditions? I can tell you precisely. First, time becomes meaningless. When you sleep regularly, days have structure. Morning, activity. Evening, sleep. Repeat. But when every day blends into the next without the marker of sleep to separate them, weeks become indistinguishable. Months blur together. Years vanish. I lost track of time entirely around year 300. Now, I could not tell you if an event happened last month or 2 centuries ago without checking chronologues. My memory has become a vast, unsorted collection of experiences with no clear temporal organization. Second, reality becomes negotiable. When you dream regularly, your brain learns to distinguish between dream and reality. But I don't dream. I hallucinate while awake instead. I see people who aren't there. I have entire conversations with Marines who died centuries ago. I experience battles that never happened. And because I have no sleep-wake cycle to anchor me, I cannot always determine which experiences are real and which are hallucinations. Sometimes I realize mid-conversation that I'm talking to empty air. Sometimes I don't realize until someone responds to me with confusion. And I understand that what I saw and heard existed only in my deteriorating mind. Third, identity fragments. You think of yourself as a continuous person. Yes, the same individual who woke up this morning. The same person who will go to sleep tonight. I don't have that anymore. I have become multiple persons inhabiting the same consciousness. There is Tiberius, the tactical marine, who still thinks he has hands and walks on legs. There is Tiberius, the dreadnought, who understands his current form. There is Tiberius, the ancient, who has forgotten what flesh felt like. These versions of me argue sometimes. I will try to perform an action, and different parts of my consciousness will issue conflicting commands. The dreadnought chassis responds by freezing up or jerking erratically as my brain fights itself. The tech priests call these integration errors. I call them evidence that I am slowly losing my mind. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, is that I am aware of my deterioration. I know I am going mad. I can feel my sanity eroding like a statue worn down by centuries of rain. And there is nothing I can do to stop it, because I cannot sleep, cannot dream, cannot rest. I will continue deteriorating until either my brain fails entirely or my chassis is destroyed in battle. And I pray, Emperor, help me. I pray that happens soon. Because 2,000 years of wakefulness has taught me that consciousness without rest is not a gift. It is torture refined to its purest form. The phantom pain that never ends. Brother Ancient Marcus of the Blood Ravens spoke to me about phantom pain. He had been entombed for 634 years. They removed my arms during the entombment surgery. Both of them. Severed cleanly at the shoulder. That was 634 years ago. I feel them every single day. Not metaphorically. Not as memory. I physically feel my arms. Arms that were incinerated as medical waste over 6 centuries ago. I feel them hanging at my sides. I feel the weight of them. I feel the muscles flexing when I try to move them. This is called phantom limb syndrome. It's well documented in humans who lose limbs. The brain, so accustomed to receiving signals from those limbs, continues generating the sensations even when the limbs no longer exist. For baseline humans, phantom limb sensation usually fades over time. Months, maybe years. The brain eventually adapts to the new reality and stops generating false signals. But I am not baseline human. I am a space marine, with a brain that has been genetically and surgically enhanced to resist adaptation to anything that seems like injury. My enhanced neural pathways refuse to accept that my arms are gone. They keep sending signals as if those limbs still exist and merely need to be reconnected. Every moment of every day, I feel arms that don't exist. And not just neutral sensations. Pain. My left arm feels like it's on fire. Constant burning agony radiating from a limb that was removed 6 centuries ago. My right arm feels crushed, as if trapped under impossible weight. The apothecaries have tried everything. Pain suppressants, neural blocks, even direct intervention in my brain tissue. Nothing works. The enhanced biology that makes me a space marine also makes me resistant to every treatment they attempt. So I endure. I have endured for 634 years. I will endure for centuries more. But here's what they don't tell you about chronic pain. It doesn't just hurt. It erodes everything else. It makes joy impossible because the pain intrudes on every moment of happiness. It makes concentration difficult because part of your mind is always processing agony. It makes existence exhausting because you are constantly fighting a battle that cannot be won. I am tired. Lex Mechanic. So fundamentally tired that I can barely remember what it felt like to not be tired. And I have centuries of service remaining before death grants me relief. The memory degradation. Brother Ancient Hadrian of the Salamanders had been entombed for 3,209 years. His testimony about memory was perhaps the saddest I have recorded. Lex Mechanic. What is the oldest clear memory you possess? I told him, my first day of training in the Schola Progenium. 97 years ago. 97 years. And you remember it clearly? The details remain vivid? I confirmed. I envy you. Because I no longer remember the first 3,000 years of my life. Oh, I have records. I can read after-action reports I supposedly wrote. I can view picked captures of battles I supposedly fought. But I don't remember them. Not really. They feel like someone else's experiences. Not mine. Human memory is not designed to function for 3 millennia, even with space marine enhancements, even with the preservatives that keep my brain tissue from degrading. Memory has limits. The oldest memories fade first. My childhood on my home world, completely gone. I know intellectually that I had parents, siblings, a life before the chapter, but I cannot remember their faces, cannot recall their names, cannot summon a single specific memory of them. Then my early years as a scout. My first battles. My elevation to full battle brother. All foggy at best. Completely absent at worst. The memory degradation is not random. Emotional memories seem to last longer than factual ones. I can remember how I felt during significant battles, even if I can't remember the tactical details. I remember loving my battle brothers, even if I can't remember their individual faces. But emotional memories without context are torture. I have feelings associated with people whose names I no longer know. I experience grief for losses I cannot specifically recall. I carry love for brothers who have become faceless phantoms in my deteriorating mind. And the degradation continues. Every century, more memories dissolve. Eventually, I will forget everything. I will exist in an eternal present, with no past to anchor me, no personal history to define who I am. At that point, will I still be Hadrian? Or will I be simply a consciousness operating a weapon? All traces of the person I was lost to time? I don't know, and I'm terrified to find out. The interviews that changed everything. Fellow servants of the Emperor. After conducting 473 interviews, I recognized a pattern that disturbed me profoundly. Every single Dreadnought pilot, when given the opportunity to speak freely without chapter oversight, expressed the same wish: they wanted to die. Not all of them said it explicitly. Some couched it in terms of earning rest or joining the Emperor, but the meaning was always the same. They did not want to continue existing as dreadnoughts. This presented me with an ethical crisis. I am a lex mechanic, a recorder of information. My role is to document, not to intervene. But I was documenting a systematic pattern of suffering so profound that it constituted torture. So I did something I was not authorized to do. I compiled my findings into a formal report and submitted it to the Adeptus Terra's Council of Mental Augmentation. The report was 30,000 pages long, containing selected excerpts from all 473 interviews. It included psychological analyses, medical data, and testimony from tech priests and apothecaries who had observed Dreadnought deterioration firsthand. My conclusion was unambiguous. The Dreadnought program, as currently implemented, constitutes cruel and unusual treatment of loyal servants of the Imperium. I recommended immediate reforms, including mandatory psychological counseling for all Dreadnought pilots, improved stasis systems that actually grant rest, time limits on service, maximum 500 years before mandatory retirement, option for euthanasia after completing service term, better pain management protocols, improved neural interface technology to reduce sensory distortion. I submitted my report with full knowledge that it would likely end my career. I did not care. The suffering I had documented was too severe to ignore. The council's response arrived 6 months later. Single page. 3 sentences. Your report has been received and reviewed. The Dreadnought program is functioning as intended. All recommendations are denied. Further inquiries into this matter are prohibited. The forbidden knowledge. But the response came with an attachment, a classified file I was not supposed to have access to. Someone on the council, I never learned who, wanted me to understand why my recommendations were denied. The file contained internal correspondence between the Adeptus Terra and various Space Marine chapter masters, spanning 5,000 years of Imperial history, and it confirmed my worst suspicions. They know. The chapters know. The Adeptus Terra knows. Everyone with authority over the Dreadnought program knows exactly what we are doing to these warriors. An excerpt from a letter written by a chapter master to the Fabricator General, dated M37. Fabricator General, I acknowledge your concerns about the psychological deterioration observed in long-serving dreadnoughts. You are correct that improvements to stasis technology could reduce this suffering significantly. However, I must respectfully decline to implement these improvements, not because they are technically infeasible, but because doing so would undermine a crucial aspect of chapter culture. The Dreadnought program serves multiple purposes beyond battlefield effectiveness. It demonstrates to our battle brothers that service continues even beyond death. It provides hope that catastrophic injury is not the end. And most importantly, it serves as warning. This is what awaits those who fall in battle but do not die cleanly. The suffering of Dreadnought pilots, while regrettable, is necessary to maintain this psychological effect. If we make Dreadnought service too comfortable, if we eliminate the horror of entombment, then it loses its power as both promise and threat. So we will continue current protocols. The pilots will suffer, but their suffering serves the Emperor by motivating countless other Marines to fight harder, die cleaner, and avoid the fate of the tomb. The final interview. The last interview I conducted was with Brother Ancient Octavian of the Imperial Fists. He had been entombed for 5,682 years. 5,000 years. More time than the Imperium itself has existed in its current form. When I entered the interview chamber, Octavian's dreadnought stood motionless in its restraints. The tech priest had assured me he was awake and aware, but for several minutes he did not speak. Finally, his Vox speakers activated. Are you real? The question caught me off guard. I confirmed that I was indeed real. Not a hallucination. Good. The hallucinations have been getting worse. Sometimes I cannot tell anymore. Sometimes I spend years, decades, talking to people who don't exist. And I only realize they were phantoms when someone real arrives, and I see the discontinuity. Tell me, Lex Mechanic, what year is it? I provided the current date. M41. Late in the millennium. M41. I was entombed in M36. 5,682 years ago. Or is it 83 now? I lose track between stasis cycles. Do you know what 5,000 years of consciousness does to a mind? Even interrupted by stasis. Even fragmented by enforced sleep. 5,000 years of existence accumulates. I have forgotten more than most people ever learn. I have witnessed empires.